and welcome to a special MeckDec edition of our Museum from Home programs. I am lucky enough to be standing with an expert of the legendary MeckDec here. Scott Syfert has written extensively about the MeckDec, is involved in all of the different celebrations that have been happening, and is actually an avid collector of MeckDec memorabilia and has been kind enough to invite us to see some of his collection. So thank you so much for having me here today. What do you have?
Well, thanks for coming. So we can start with sort of here. We've got a collection of stuff from various MeckDec celebrations over the last 200 years, as I'm sure you do and your viewers know. MeckDec was sort of the biggest thing in North Carolina for many years, and there were sitting American presidents who've come here. They're dignitaries. It used to be the biggest commemoration in Charlotte's history, but also in the state of North Carolina.
So why was it such a big celebration? What about it? It captured everyone's imagination.
Well, it was the first Declaration of Independence, as many people believed. And that was a big deal, especially 100 and plus years ago, where each state sort of vied with each other to say we were the first in leading for freedom for the United States. And of course, the Virginians would say, well, it was all about us. It's Thomas Jefferson. And the Bostonians and the Massachusetts people would say, no, it's the Boston Tea Party, it's Samuel Adams, it's John Adams, and so forth. And the people in North Carolina about 200 years ago said, well, wait a second. Many people don't know this, but the first Declaration of Independence happened in this remote, rural, backcountry place called Mecklenburg County. And so that became a whole focus for history lovers and patriots and so forth in the state of North Carolina. And of course, as you allude to, not everybody believed this. Thomas Jefferson said he found the story spurious. John Adams did believe it, but in any event, we didn't care. So we had a bunch of parties, and every year there was commemorations. So what you see here is a collection of various stuff from various periods that I've collected about the MeckDec and related to the parties and the celebrations and so forth.
Why do you think it matters so much, the celebration of this? What does that mean? I know there's a lot of talk recently about kind of examining our celebrations, examining these ideas,
right,
especially as we think about 1775. There's a lot of really great things that are happening, but there's a lot of really terrible things that are happening
right,
as well. Why is it so important to keep celebrating this?
Well, it's important to keep celebrating because it's the common story we all have, right? It's our history, just as you have the Rock House at the Charlotte History Museum. I mean, that's a tangible manifestation of our common history. And we learn the lessons of history, as you say, the pros, the cons, the good and the bad, at the same time that they're fighting to be free and independent of Great Britain. Of course, many of the MeckDec signers are also slaveholders. So there's a dichotomy there that runs throughout, not only American history, but also every historical event, right? But it's the common link we have. It's our shared history. If we don't know what our shared history is in the community history, what do we know, right? And how do we have any values or beliefs or ethics or visions of what the future should be if we don't learn from the past?
Absolutely. It's about celebrating these ideals, these moments of kind of greatness, these
right,
moments when those thoughts of freedom and liberty are kind of just manifesting themselves. And we know that this continues to be a point throughout the next 200 years, 250 years, looking at what does it mean really to make sure that everyone has access to that. So when we celebrate MeckDec, we're really celebrating everything that's happened over 250 years.
Right. In fact, so, the statue of Captain James Jack that Chaz Fagan erected for the May 20th Society 15 so years ago, it's called the Spirit of Mecklenburg. And the reason for that sort of runs as a theme throughout the May 20th Society stuff that we do, which is it's not just about one event or the historical accuracy or whether it happened or the debate, or it doesn't really matter in our view. It's about the spirit of Mecklenburg. The people that lived here were forward-thinking, progressive, freedom-loving people. And sort of that spirit runs throughout Mecklenburg County history. I mean, how do you take a small town like Charlotte and turn it into a major financial center over the last 50 years, turn it into a huge, the 15th largest city in the United States? So that sort of spirit of Mecklenburg is really what we've been celebrating, not what really happened in 1775 and how that's interesting, of course, but it's more broadly, as you say, the theme of this whole story over 250 years.
Absolutely, and we see lots of celebrations that are happening. We see during the Civil Rights Movement, the MeckDec ideals start popping up again.
That's right.
We see in 1976, and I notice a plate behind me that says 1976, really that centennial, and we're coming up on 250 years of America. That kind of big birthday celebration, and celebrations like the MeckDec continue to be relevant because they remind us some of those ideals that we've
That's
been
right.
fighting for.
That's right.
Mhm.
So some of the stuff, as you point out, we have here. Here's some plateware from the 1976 bicentennial commemoration. We have some papers, the London Gazette from 1783. We have some letters from Thomas Babington Macaulay, who's a famous British historian of the 19th century. And on the MeckDec stuff, we have the famous 1975 whiskey decanter, which many people, I think, this sort of float around eBay. People see this, but it's Captain Jack in front of the Charlotte courthouse. And this was a gift from the city of Charlotte in 1975 to various dignitaries. You can still find them that actually have the whiskey in them, I'm told, but I have not seen that. We have here a couple bottles. These are really interesting. These are the wine bottles that were given out in 1975 commemoration. This celebrates the Halifax Resolves. It says April 12th, 1775, first official state action for independence, Halifax Resolves. And of course, then we've got the MeckDec commemoration of this too. May 20th, 1775, America's first Declaration of Independence. So these are kind of fun. We've got a oak tree leaf from the tree in Charlottesville, Virginia, underneath which Bannister Tarleton camped in June of 1781. People ask me, how do you know this is authentic? And I said, you just have to believe. So that's kind of cool. So, and then, as I've worked on this store for 20 years, you amass, and people send you all sorts of things, right? Papers, books. We've got sort of a monograph of the signers' signatures, such as, that they put together. This got mistaken for a copy of the MeckDec at some point in the 1920s or 30s, which led to a bunch of the critics saying, well, look, these people are forging this evidence again, which they weren't. It was just an honest mistake. We've got here, for example, a pamphlet was printed in 1847 in which this academic named Reverend Thomas Smith went back and traced the language of the MeckDec to the Scottish Covenanting tradition of writings in 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, which I don't recommend anyone read because it's rather dense. But it was interesting, and I did have to read it for the book, so you don't have to now.
And that book, it is the first American Declaration of Independence, the disputed history. Question mark, exactly, the disputed history of the Mecklenburg Declaration of May 20th of 1775. So definitely recommend reading that, and if you're a historical nerd like me, I'm actually very excited to try reading this right here, thinking about those connections, because I think one of the things that's so important about the MeckDec story is that it's not just this one moment in time. It's not just May 20th. Right. It's a story that dates back to all of these kind of writings that are floating around in the Atlantic world, and then it moves forward for 250 years as people even in the 1920s are fascinated with this story.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, it was the biggest historical controversy of the American historical controversy of the 19th century, because you had the sort of Jeffersonians on the one side who are saying this is complete nonsense and trying to prove that Jefferson knew nothing about this, which is probably the case. Then you've got the Adamsonians and the North Carolinians sort of aligned, trying to prove that it was true, right? Because this was the first Declaration of Independence, and maybe did Jefferson plagiarize from it, and all these theories went about, and books and counter books are written and debates are going on. It was a very heated topic, if you could believe that at the time. And no one could ever prove to the satisfaction of the skeptics or the believers that it happened, right? There's a large body of evidence, but it's very mixed evidence. There's a lot of evidence that it did occur, but of course all the original papers are lost in a fire in April of 1800, so no one could point to, this is the paper. Now, there are papers that still exist. They're in Chapel Hill Library. Some are float around on eBay, if you can believe that. But it's not 100% clear to everyone's satisfaction what they are, who wrote them, what they prove, and so forth. So it's been shrouded in mystery. But to your point, why we celebrate this again, this date, May 20th, has recurred in various iterations through North Carolina and Charlotte, specifically history. During the Civil Rights Movement, the African-American students led a march from Johnson C. Smith University uptown on May 20th. Mm-hmm. I think it was 1963, I believe. Similarly, and on the other side of that equation, North Carolina secedes from the Union on May 20th, 1861, and that was not by accident. In fact, Confederate battle flags from that period had the two dates, May 20th, 1861 and 1775 on them. So it touches parts of our good and our bad history, but it recurs throughout. And of course you have, and if you're in Charlotte, so many things about Charlotte, echo this story. You've got Freedom Park, you've got Independence Square, you've got Independence Boulevard, And those are designed around this story. President Ford comes to open, celebrates in Freedom Park in 1975 and so forth. So again, it teaches the good and the bad, which is the history of every people, right? But it's a common theme that recurs in various strands.